Hi, I'm Jamey from Stegmaier Games, and I'm filming this video for some wonderful people at the Istanbul Technical University's online session that have asked some questions, specifically 22 questions about game design and publishing. But I'm also going to put this video on our YouTube channel at Stegmaier Games. Thank you so much for these questions. I'm happy to answer other questions or to elaborate on these questions in the comments. Because there are so many questions, I'll probably just try to answer in brief if I can. And yeah, I'll do my best to get through all 22. And while I'm doing this, just so you can look at something more interesting than me, I will put on the other screen a few other games that we have, or a few games that we have at Stegmaier Games. So here's Vantage on the screen. I'll leave that up while I talk a little bit about the first few questions. So the first question is, when developing a new game, do you first think about the mechanisms and then look for a suitable theme? Or do you create mechanisms for the theme that you want to cover? This really depends on the game. I have used a variety of techniques for games to design games. Sometimes I think of the world. Sometimes I build the world first, as I did with Vantage. Sometimes I have a great, well, what I think is a great mechanical idea, and I try to pair that with a theme. But for me, almost right away, I can't design one without the other. So even if it starts with one, the first moment that I start brainstorming in pencil and paper, I am mixing and mashing mechanisms with the theme. Number two is, how can a new board game designer break into the industry? Should they showcase their talent by doing small projects? Are there internship programs available? A new board game designer, how can they break into the industry? I think maybe the number, well, I don't know if this is the number one way to do it, but I would actively encourage you to design games. Don't just think of ideas for games. Ideas are not worth anything in the game design industry. Actual execution of going through the entire design process repeatedly, and then choosing the game of yours that you feel is really unique and innovative and special, and then pitch that game to publishers. Look at how different publishers accept pitches. Every publisher has different submission guidelines. Find the right publisher for your game and pitch them. I think that's the best way to break into the industry, to design something great and pitch to the right publisher. Number three is, when beginning a new game, do you start with a theme? Oh, this is actually very similar to the first question. Do you start with a theme, or has your process evolved to begin with mechanisms and then retrofit the theme? It's actually very similar, same answer to number one. And a sub-question here is, at what point do you abandon the thematic cohesion if it conflicts with mechanical clarity? That's something that I could definitely answer. For me, my overall objective is to make a fun game. So if there is a mechanism that matches the theme beautifully, but it creates frustration for playtesters, I'm going to remove that mechanism. I'm going to smooth it out. And I have done that in multiple games, including, I know, in Viticulture, one of my earliest games. I definitely had a mechanism revolving around the grapes going bad. That was just not fun. And so I removed that mechanism and made it a little less thematic as a result, but made it considerably more fun as a result as well. I'm going to switch over to a new game on the image here. This is Wormspan, designed by Connie Volgeman. I'm a designer, but I also help develop a number of, well, any other game that we publish that I'm not the designer of, I am the developer of. So I'm helping to make the game more balanced, more intuitive, hopefully more fun. Question number four is, how do you determine the balance, speaking of balance between meaningful player choice and analysis paralysis, especially in games like Scythe where options are many? What techniques do you use to guide players gently towards strategic paths without feeling railroaded? Two slightly separate but great questions here. The main thing that I try to do, because I try to give players a lot of interesting decisions, but I try to let players plan ahead for their turn. So this is by design. I try not to have, if it is a game where players are taking sequential turns, say like clockwise turns, I try not to give the player to my right decisions that so completely change what I can do on my turn that I have to wait for my turn to think about my turn. Rather, I like to have interaction in games. I like to have a lot of different types of interaction, including positive player interaction in our games. But I try to structure that interaction around allowing players to plan ahead for their next turn. I think that's the key. As for guiding players gently towards strategic paths without feeling railroaded, I think this is tied to asymmetric abilities. The main thing I try to do is give players asymmetric abilities, if there is going to be asymmetry in the game, that nudge them in a direction, but don't force them in that direction. They don't say, you are not going to be able to compete in this game if you choose to ignore this ability. I have Wormspan on the screen here. I don't know if Wormspan really has anything like this, because Wormspan isn't an asymmetric game, but that is generally the philosophy I go for with asymmetry in games. Scythe brought you global recognition. Here, I'll flip over to Scythe while we're talking about Scythe. Here we go. Scythe brought you global recognition, but did it trap you in a formula? Have you ever felt creatively boxed in by audience expectations set by Scythe's success? Fortunately, I have not. I think that's a completely fair question, but when I design a game, I generally like to design something new, something that I haven't designed before, or something that doesn't exist. I think the only way that I felt not trapped, but basically when I decided to design a new game in the Scythe universe, and that is Expeditions, which is a sequel to Scythe, I didn't feel boxed in, but I did feel really compelled to make something that captured the feeling of Scythe while being its own game. And that is a tough puzzle to solve because a lot of people know Scythe and know the feelings that Scythe gives them when they play the game, this engine building optimization puzzle game. To capture that and to capture the theme of the world in a sequel that is different mechanically but feels the same was tough. I had to design Expeditions around a dozen times before from scratch before I feel like I got it correct or pretty close to being correct in the final version. And number 6, what's your biggest design regret? Not a game that failed, but one that succeeded commercially yet fell short of your personal standards. Let's see if I have any games that fit that description up here on the screen. I would say one of my biggest surprises is this game Tapestry. Tapestry has succeeded commercially. We've sold quite a few copies of Tapestry. It is a successful game. This is a civilization game where you get to truly build your own civilization. You aren't limited by real world history or people or places. But this is a game that I feel like if I had released this game as my first game, like back in the days of viticulture, where I was a bit more of an underdog, I think Tapestry would be one of the top rated games on Board Game Geek. I think it would have been easily in the top 100. But I think we talked about expectations, audience expectations. I think as your audience grows and expands and as more people know who you are, those expectations may shift. And you may have some people who, this isn't even about other people and how they think about me, but I think there is just something changes. I can't even quite describe it, but I love the game Tapestry. I think it's one of my favorite games. It does exactly what it sets out to do, and I guess I've been a little surprised that the reception to it, and even among Stegmaier Games fans, it is oftentimes their favorite game. And yet it has what I would consider a slightly lower rating on Board Game Geek, 7.4. So that surprised me a little bit. 7 is, you've said that the first prototype is just the beginning. That's definitely true. I said it, I still agree with myself. What in your experience separates prototypes that succeed from those you abandon early? And how often do you start completely over instead of iterating? That's a great question about early prototypes. I mean, there are definitely many early prototypes that I play where I'm like, this not only plays out differently on the table than it did in my head, but this just isn't worth pursuing. There isn't anything here. It's really just a gut feeling, because oftentimes then on the other hand, I will play a game for the first time and realize there's something here, but it's not this. This isn't right yet. This game needs a lot of work. How often do I start over completely instead of iterating? I often try to iterate first if I think that is possible, because that is a lot easier than starting over from scratch. But once I have kind of committed to myself that we are going to make a certain game, like with Expeditions, which I mentioned earlier, then I think there's a greater chance that I will start over from scratch if the iterations just aren't working. And them not working is both a gut call, but also if we're getting consistent ratings from playtesters that are lower than, that are like 6s and 7s rather than 8s, 9s, and 10s, that's an indication to me that the game isn't quite doing something right. It isn't quite succeeding in the way it should. Let's flip over to, how about, we haven't shown viticulture yet. I'll put viticulture on the screen. You've noted that if a rule is too hard to explain concisely, it's better to change that rule. How often do you go back and simplify mechanisms to make rule writing cleaner? Any significant examples? And I picked the game that I designed the longest ago for this example, I guess. I mean, it happens quite frequently. And it often happens while I am writing the rule book. If I'm writing the rule book and I'm like, oh, wow, this rule which was very easy to explain out loud, is actually a lot more complex and nuanced and has things that you need to remember or exceptions. As I'm writing the rulebook, I might change the mechanisms of the game. And of course, playtest a lot after that, but that is oftentimes the point in the process where that happens. Any examples to make it cleaner? What is, viticulture is a tough one because I really did write that so long ago. Apiary has one that I actually regret a little bit. Apiary has a rule that is oftentimes confused, that ended up in the game, where in apiary you can have your worker be bumped back to you, either by yourself or by another player. And generally, you want that worker to re-enter your supply so you can place that worker. However, in apiary also, the point in time where you gain income is when you choose to retrieve workers. And so if you are constantly being bumped, even if you have a really good income system mechanism set up or an engine set up, if you keep being bumped, then you aren't getting that income. And so we built in a choice for players to choose not to have their worker re-enter their supply when it's bumped, but rather to go someplace else. And it does add some rules complexity and confusion and questions that I wonder if we should have put that in the game, even though it is also, I think, a player-first mechanism in the game. At number 9, another quote from me. You've said, or I've said, a game is a system of constraints. But when do constraints help you create, and when do they just get in the way? Where do you draw the line as a designer between freedom and structure? I think Vantage is actually a pretty good example of this, because in Vantage, I had very few constraints. I spent 8 years designing Vantage. I had a huge budget to use for the art. There are 1,600 unique illustrations in the game. I created a whole planet in Vantage of first-person perspectives. There are 800 of these first-person locations in the game. So no constraints there. And yet there are constraints in the game, and this was really helpful. Like, for example, you're building this grid of cards during the game, and I found in playtesting that once you had a 3x3 grid of cards, and that wasn't always a limit, you could go beyond that grid, but once you had a 3x3 grid of cards, you were so powerful in the game that gaining more cards didn't really have that much meaning in the game. Now in Vantage, you can gain more cards and they can go to your reserve. But in the final version, there's this nice constraint that I built into the game of a 3x3 grid. And that helped me with a number of design mechanisms, but it also let me add these nice dual layered player mats as an add-on. Without that restraint, you can't have this nice component in the game. So I think there's a good balance here. And this is an example of the balance between having a lot of freedom in the game. I made a whole planet that's way bigger than most games are in terms of art and scope. But also in the game, you have this constraint to keep players focused on a reasonable number of cards. I think that's a good constraint to give players. Number 10, I'll flip. Oh, where haven't we flipped? We haven't been on Red Rising yet. Here we go. How can we better understand the mechanisms by which our brain experiences entertainment? That is a really thinky question there. I like it. I don't know if I have a great answer for this, but I do know that this is one of the reasons that I recommend playing a lot of different games. If you're a designer or just for fun, but especially as a designer. And as you're playing those games, pay attention to the moments where you are really engaged and where you are having fun. We all define fun in different ways, but pay attention to those moments, maybe make a note of them. And when I'm playing a game where maybe I encounter something frustrating, I also try to pay attention to that because I want to eliminate frustrations from our game. So to pay attention to those fun moments, eliminate the frustration. How do you structure the flow of a board game during the design process? I think a lot about the flow, but when I think about flow, I'm thinking about how the game flows from one turn to the next, how much the game is getting in the way of players just taking one turn after another. There are a lot of games that are structured around rounds. And we have some. Wormstand has rounds. Viticulture has rounds. Tapestry has kind of rounds. Libertalia has a lot of constraints because Libertalia is a simultaneous game. All players are doing one thing together, and then they're doing another thing together. So these are things that can get in the way of the flow of the game if there are too many, I think, too much structure to the game. So I think it's about the amount of structure in the game. I like to smooth out the structure. If the structure is not needed for players to just have one turn flow into the next and so on, I always try to do that. And if that isn't working, then we might find another system of rounds because sometimes the game needs a little break in the game. If you need to gain income, if you need to score a goal like in Wormstand, I think sometimes games can benefit from those little breaks. Number 12 is Whom do you conduct playtesting with? What do you aim to achieve through playtesting? Through playtesting, I try to achieve fun, balance, intuition, and to make sure the rules are as clear and robust as they need to be. I playtest locally with my partner Megan, with friends, with local designers, and then I also have a great group of blind playtesters, which is unguided playtesters, where they're printing out the rules to the game and printing out the components, printing, cutting, assembling, and they're playing it with their friends and their family at the table. We do very little digital playtesting at Stegmaier Games. We mainly focus on that on-the-table playtesting. What are the benefits of playing board games? Do you think playing games makes the world a better place? What can we change in the world through playing games? This is a wonderful question. I think we play games for a lot of different reasons, but I think two quick benefits. One, I think it allows for creative problem solving in a low stakes environment. If you win or lose a game, doesn't really matter for your general life. But it can feel really good if you win the game. And along the way, if you solve some problems in creative ways, I think that is good for our problem solving skills as humans within the context of the game. It can feel good, and to bring those skills into the broader world, I think that is really good as well. I also think games are really helpful for introverts. I am an introvert, but I like to connect with other people. I just like to have some structure when I connect with other people. And games and sports are a great way of building that structure into games are just really good at that. What can we change in the world through playing games? I think for the most part, I think we can become better problem solvers and better communicators and better at working with other people, whether it's a cooperative or competitive game. I think games can help us do that. Which tools do you use during physical prototyping, and how long is the prototyping process expected to take? Prototyping takes a lot of my time, honestly. Because I typically playtest on the actual tabletop. If I iterate a game and I change a bunch of cards, I am printing out a bunch of cards on my printer back here, and I am cutting them out. I have a paper cutter called a Cutterpillar that helps me cut those cards. That's mainly the main tool that I use. I also use InDesign for laying out cards, and have only recently, I'm a little behind the curve here, but only recently have started working with someone who knows InDesign really well to use spreadsheets to import a bunch of stuff that I've changed on the cards into InDesign to make that process smoother, and also to help the final typesetting of those cards in the long run. What's a game that I haven't shown here? Libertalia, I haven't shown that very much. Which board games are essential for board game designers to play? I probably have a video about this somewhere, but I think what I'll say about this, instead of saying that certain games are essential, I would say that it is essential to play a variety of games, including games that you wouldn't expect to enjoy, games that aren't the typical type of game that you play. I have learned just as much from playing Just One and So Clover as I have from playing Solkin and Terra Mystica. These are very different games, and I design more games, I think, like Solkin and Terra Mystica than I do design games like Just One and So Clover. And yet I'm still learning from the types of decisions that you get to make in those games, those fun moments, the different ways that those different games make you feel clever. And so I think it is about variety. I think variety is essential for any game designer. Try things. The next game that you play, make it a game that you wouldn't expect, that's in a genre or a theme or a mechanism that you wouldn't expect yourself to enjoy, especially if you've heard good things about that game. Give that a try. Number 16 here, we have around 7 questions left, 8 questions left. How can an indie board game designer monetize their product? I mean, this is what self-publishing is really all about. Stegmaier Games is a company that founded off of, I founded Stegmaier Games because I wanted to publish my game Viticulture, or to see if other people wanted to play or buy this game Viticulture. To date, around half of our games are designed by me, and around half of them are designed by other designers. So if you are an indie board game designer, I think self-publishing is, well, actually there are really two paths here. If you want to run a business, then self-publishing and crowdfunding, I think, are a wonderful way to get started. However, if you really just want to be a game designer, which is a wonderful thing to decide to do, because we have a lot of self-publishers, and running a business requires a lot of time and a lot of risk and a lot of things that are not game design. If you just love the game design portion, go back to that earlier question that I mentioned about figuring out which of your games that you have worked on is the best and pitch that one to publishers. That's how you can monetize it. Number 17, how can two board game designers collaborate to finalize a product? What is the ideal number of game designers to work on a project at the same time? I think this depends on the person. For me, there are games where I've worked with other people, including Libertalia. This was our version of the game had a pretty heavily influence from me talking to the original designer, Paolo Mori, about what I thought the game could, how the game could improve. Red Rising. Red Rising is a game that I co-designed with my coworker, Alex. This was a game that I struggled to design, and I felt like I needed a co-designer for it. And Alex came along and had a great impact on the game. And Alex and I think we had a good collaboration because we split the work of Red Rising. Oftentimes, I think with collaborations, you might have an idea guy or an idea person, and then you have someone who's actually doing the work. The person who's actually updating the files, who's actually cutting and pasting the prototype, who's not just playtesting the game, but they're doing all the work for the game. I found it the best when we were able to split that work, really split the work. So Alex designed half the cards in Red Rising. I designed the other half. And yes, I was the one in InDesign typing in the text, but Alex was giving me the text to type there. That wasn't all that hard. So we really did split the duty. So I would say that's the main thing for collaborating. Figure out a truly equitable division of the work so that one person isn't actually doing all the work, but only getting half the credit. I think that's a way to burn out. Here's another question about this. Should they divide the work and design separately or work on the same parts and make decisions together? I think it depends on the project, but I would just find an equitable division of the work. I think both people can't be actually editing the prototype. Someone has to be the one to actually edit the prototype and actually make the decisions as to how the things are implemented into the prototype. But the other person can really design. They can design half the game if they want to. Especially if it's a game with like cards or tiles, you can literally say, okay, these tiles or cards are the ones that you're designing. Design them, and I'll be the one to type in the information that you write. You can definitely do that. What qualities set our board game apart from others when pitching? This is about the hook. I love thinking about the hooks. What are the hooks of your game that can hook someone in, to grab them in and make them excited to play the game, excited to learn more at the very least? I think it's really helpful for a game to have between 1 and 3 really strong mechanical hooks. They don't have to be unique. They don't have to be something that's never existed. It can be an iteration. It can be deck building with a twist. Like Dune Imperium, deck building, but with worker placement added in. Dune Imperium also had deck building where the cards in Dune Imperium had a portion of the card that you gain the benefit only if you didn't play the card. That's a great hook. I think it also helps to have a component hook. What's a component? So this is a great example of Tapestry. In Apiary, we have the fun component hook of the workers that aren't dice. They level up throughout the game, which is also tied to the mechanisms of the game. There's also an artistic hook, but that's more the responsibility of the publisher than the designer. So I think when you are pitching a game, I would go into it with at least with 1 to 3 really strong mechanical hooks and a pitch for one product design element that you think will make the game stand apart. Number 20, do you use AI for basic calculations and game balancing? Do you think junior game designers will no longer be needed? How can a game designer use AI to prototype faster and more efficiently? I don't use AI at all, and I wouldn't recommend using it at all. I am entirely anti-generative AI. I want to write every word that I write. I want to hire human artists, and I don't find any utility in using AI to create our games. The one part of the future of AI that I would be open to, in addition to human playtesting, is for asymmetric games or games that have asymmetric elements. If I could push the components into an AI engine, and that AI engine could playtest the game 10,000 times in a day and spit out a bunch of data about balance, I am open to considering that data in addition to the human data that I'm getting from human playtesting. But I wouldn't rely on it, and I wouldn't lean on it. Number 21, can you talk about the board game market? Does the number of people buying board games increase every year, or is it decreasing? What advice would you give to indie studios to sustain themselves financially? Should they develop multiple games at the same time? For indie game studios, yes, I do think it's good to work on multiple games or have a plan for the future. but also to really focus on the games that you think have the greatest chance of succeeding in the market, which I think is tough to do. If you put all your effort into one game and that game doesn't do well, then and that's your game for the year, that's really rough. But I think you have a better chance of putting a lot of effort and shining the spotlight on a single game and having that game succeed than if you're trying to pump out game after game every other month. I also generally recommend that if you are starting out, if you are a small game studio, that maybe it isn't your only job. Maybe that isn't your full-time job. Maybe that's still a hobby at that point. Even for me, back in the viticulture days, I still had another full-time job. I still had a full-time job when I was publishing Euphoria as well. It really wasn't until Euphoria and viticulture we were actively reprinting them. We were having them localized in other languages. We got them into retail and distribution, and we were selling directly. We had a really diverse number of channels for selling these games that I decided to give it a try and go full-time for Stegmaier Games. I think it's very difficult to do, and so I would put as little pressure on the finances as possible by not making it your full-time job if you have that choice, if you have that luxury. And last, what books would you recommend? I love this question. I think you're probably asking about game design books because I could recommend a whole other host of books if you'd like. And let's see if I haven't shared a game here that I want to put on the screen at the end. I think I put pretty much everything up here. I'll put the most recent one, Vantage. What books would I recommend for game design? I think Like a Game Designer is both a great book and a great podcast. Actually, I think really, honestly, for this type of book, I think more about the podcast. There is 101 Games to Play Before You Die. That is a recent book that I think is excellent. Other podcasts are Board Game Design Lab. The Board Game Design Lab podcast is no longer active, but it is full of excellent interviews from Gabe Barrett and a number of designers, including me. I was on a few interviews. I don't know if they're excellent, but I was there. Those are available. I would recommend checking out those interviews. But I also, if you want a recent, really good book, 101 Board Games to Play Before You Die, I think is a really good book for looking at a pretty wide variety of games. Thank you so much for these questions. I know I didn't delve deep into any particular topic, but if you want me to delve deeper, let me know in the comments. I'm happy to follow up with more answers to your questions, and I hope that the online session goes really well. Thank you all. Take care. Bye.